Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer, and Les Luthor is here with me. And this is some iteration of the double cross or the double X, if you like it to be like, however you like it. Double X as in rated, or double cross as in, British rule. That's what it is. We might get into some Q's today, so it might not just be X's, it may be Q's as well. Good afternoon for you, Les. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Always nice to spend a little time with you. You have a unique perspective in the way that you observe all the nonsense going on around us, and I truly appreciate it and love talking to you. So glad to spend a little time with you before I hit the road.
Yeah, I feel the same. Yeah, I recently heard you on one of your chats with, I think it was Ben Balderson and one of the Weaving Spiders guys, and I just want to say thank you for being so complimentary about my work.
You're welcome. Right.
Yeah,
I think people. It's very you. There's a swagger and a brashness with which you just put out your thoughts or your opinions. You don't feel the need to provide a lot of like explanation or reasoning as to why you've come to the viewpoint that you have. You just say it, and I think we have. I think we spend way too much time, myself included in this, sort of trying to articulate in a way that will be more digestible for people how we've come to the position we stand at. And I think that that's not necessary, right? Like
yeah,
something gets lost in that, and you don't do that. You have like the swagger that you put your material out with or state your opinions with actually is very remindful to me of the style of music that I like the most, of like the sound of techno that first got my attention. It was like the Swedish techno of the late 90s and early 2000s, mid to late 90s and early 2000s. And there was just this swagger and brashness to it that was like no frills, no fucking bells and whistles or anything like that, just what it was, right? And I like it. So that's why I give you the compliments. So, anywho, all right. Well, yeah. No, have you? Are you still just? It's just me and Nish and the realized people who are chatting with you, or have you received any more? Because you've been on you've been on our shows quite a bit now, and I'm just curious how that's translated for you at all, or not at all. Still, I can't hear you.
there we go. As in, like being invited onto other people's podcasts and whatnot. You mean?
Yes, that's what I mean. I muted myself. Sorry.
No, no one goes near me. I think people just are generally quite offended by the fact I. What am I doing? I'm really kind of shitting on people's conspiracy theories and what they believe in, aren't I? Really? I've gone from like attacking what the normies believe in, and now I'm kind of like focusing on like what the conspiracy theorists, what I call the fake awake people are focusing on. And yeah, I'm not being invited on anything. Oh well, I kind of like it. I like this kind of niche.
Right, the most hated guy in the conspiracy world, right? Yeah,
I
no,
know, I know.
it is interesting when you sort of take a perspective, even if it's just a slight departure from what the accepted norm of the alternative media or the truth movement or the conspiracy realm is. Um, then the reaction that causes. I'm actually finding it to be not as, like, at least amongst my people, not quite as severe as it used to be. Like, I've been testing some borders and boundaries of things lately, not just for the sake of testing it, but because it's really what I think, right? And for the most part, it's been received fine, or to the extent that there's been any pushback or criticism, I feel like it's mostly been respectful, right? Which I think that's actually what I'm really going for. I think it's fine that we disagree, right? I think
Yeah,
it's fine that you can have your perspective, I can have mine, everyone else can have theirs. We can disagree, we can talk about it, and it isn't like it doesn't say anything about the quality of the individual or their intention or whatever. This is just how they see it from the position that they're standing in, and like there's no. I don't know where this idea that we should all have the same perspective comes from. Like, we can't possibly. It's not possible, right? Like, that's the definition of like faux veneer or homogenization or something like that, which is just not how people actually are. So if we're pretending we all agree, or if we have been mind controlled into thinking that we all share the same perspective, then that's how we're stuck. That's actually the real problem. That's the bigger problem than any nefarious activities that may be going on.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. No, it's yes, and you know, reality is subjective. So we should not, yeah, it's not healthy to be all thinking the same, man. I mean, that's right there. That's like as you say, the Borg minded style, wasn't it? Which is not good.
Yeah, I mean, and even something as simple, and this is going to sound like very pedestrian and plain, but if you start kind of extrapolating into, like, the bigger picture from this, like, I'm very small. I'm barely 5'2", right? And you're a
Yeah.
big guy. Any room we walk into is going to look completely different to you and I. It's going to feel completely different, right? When I'm in a crowd, I feel like I better be careful because I can get trapped between two people, right? I'm pretty sure that that's not something you're concerned about. When I'm in a room, I'm looking up at everybody. When you're in a room, you're probably looking, either eye to eye with or sort of down on, and I don't mean down on in the other way, most people in the room. Right. So the way you observe any activity in your immediate surroundings is going to be different than the way I perceive mine. And those are what our like experiences and viewpoints are built on, is like those initial experiences we have, or the experiences we have closest to us, and then we project them out. So the idea that you and I could view the world the same is nonsense from the get-go.
Oh yeah.
Right. So like what probably makes me nervous or scares me is and should be very different than what makes you nervous and scares you.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know if you ever like meet up with an old school friend from like, 20 years ago, and they go over some story that happened, some epic legendary story back in the day. And you're thinking, that never fucking happened. It wasn't like that. And then like in their head, like they've swapped everyone around, who was the star of that event and who wasn't. And it's like, yeah. So over
Yeah.
time as well, it seems like memories are changing as well.
I mean, and I've told this story like many times before, but my parents have almost the same, but in a very crucial way, a different memory of something that happened to them when they were living in South Africa, right? They both agree. My dad, their car broke down in the middle of Kruger Park, right? So Kruger Park is the bush in South Africa that is famous, where you go on safaris and whatnot, but there are public roads that go through it, right? And the car broke down, and my dad got out of the car to fix it, or to try and fix it. And I think eventually they ended up having to have someone stop and call someone to bring a part or something. And, they were there for a long time. But while my dad was trying to fix it, he noticed that there was a lion in, eye shot distance, and that this was making him very scared. Right. My mom was sitting in the car, and she says, yeah, all that same thing happened, but it wasn't a lion. It was a wildebeest. Right. So a wildebeest, I don't know if this is that this should truly be how one feels, because I don't know enough about wildebeests, but wildebeests seem less threatening than a lion, right? But my mom was also in the car, and my dad was outside the car on the road, right? So like the fears, like the level of fear that one might be in could literally cause you to see something different, or even just remember it, even if you saw it clearly at the time, right? So, I mean, it's scary to be exposed. It's less scary to not be exposed. Hence, the lion versus the wildebeest, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
So,
it's interesting, like, I don't know, like how the man remembers the scare, the more heroic, scarier situation of, I had to go and fix the car, but there was a lion like literally 10 foot away about to kill me. And then your mum's like, no, it's just a wildebeest. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that's how it's story. I don't know. It's just in my head, I'm thinking of how, like, so, I've lived in like army towns, and about 9 out of 10 soldiers I meet are very honest. They admit that war is not actually that exciting. It's very boring and nothing goes on. But you always get that one guy, like the captain bullshit, that reckons he's, gone in a cave system and killed 10 Taliban with his bare hands and whatnot.
yeah.
You know, So yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's some, our own egos get involved, and uh, you know, uh, like that film. Is it called Big Fish?
Oh, that's funny. You're the second person to bring that up recently. Shane brought that up on that, not when I was on his show yesterday, but he was on my show a few weeks
Hmm.
back. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
seen the show Big Fish. One of the most important lines in my own personal inspiration is from that film.
which is
He wanted to be a legend in his own mind, the hero of his own
no,
mind.
yeah. Legend of your own story. Yeah,
Yep.
nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't know. Interesting, isn't it? Subjective reality.
Yeah, I mean, right? Like we're obviously for a lot of people at a point in reality where there's like a crisis of meaning, a crisis of purpose, right? And an obvious like way out of that can be uniquely tailored for the individual is to create a narrative for yourself that casts you in the role of the hero of your own of the story that will overcome something and whatnot. What's important is that one has the recognition that that is your narrative, that is your story, and everyone else is entitled to theirs. And so the ability to differentiate between sort of the story we tell ourselves in order to encourage ourselves to continue, to persevere, to grow, to whatever it is not necessarily the same thing as the collective reality. And so it requires a level of maturity and honesty, right? But I think storytelling, even if it's the story you tell yourself, has a very important and often overlooked place in reality, right? And it's been equated with people who tell tall tales or who are liars, and they're not the same thing. Namely, the difference being that you acknowledge that that's what you're doing, right? And if each person sort of became the author of their own narrative, their own story, and then were sort of clear on that was what was happening. And imagine the interesting discussions or the progress that could be made in terms of how one advances through whatever the fuck this reality is if people were doing that and then sharing experiences and you can learn things that, oh, okay, like if you set out this challenge for yourself, the likelihood of overcoming it is faster than if you do the character, right? There's all kinds of interesting things that could happen, but it requires people being honest with themselves and with each other about who they are and what they're doing. And for some reason, people have a real hard time with that. They want people to believe something different about themselves, and they even sometimes want to believe something different about themselves than what is the truth, than what they are, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I mean, it's great to sketch a character that you want to become, right? And we all like, it's kind of like, there's something true to the story of the idea of fake it till you make it, but be clear that that's what you're doing you're faking it. You're not there yet, or you're acting out the character that you want to become. I think these exercises can be, really helpful. And you have to be like practice pretty good psychic, mental, and social hygiene in order that you be clear about what's happening, right? So
Mm-hmm.
all right, so you sent me a couple of things that were interesting. Do you want us like you were noticing that there were cue movements of the sort that you are more interested in popping up all over the world. I didn't see any news stories to that effect over here, but I again stand at a different observation post than you do. So what is going on, or what was going on a week and a half or 2 weeks ago when you sent that to me?
So, like with the Queen's death, we had a similar situation going on in Brazil with Pele, where people were queuing up for him for his funeral. He's just died. And what's interesting is when they were like interviewing people in the crowds, a lot of them just didn't know why they were there. Um, like I'd ask people like, so what do you know, and what do you know about Pele, and when did you first discover him? And a lot of them were saying like, oh, I only just found out about him yesterday. And it goes again to that thing of they don't seem, the NPCs don't seem to know what they're doing. There is someone else controlling them. But anyway, yeah, there was that one. There was the Pope, the Vatican had their own queue movement, same as the Queen, just people queuing up. to go and see a coffin. Apparently, yesterday we had people queuing up for Prince Harry's new book. We've had, apparently there's NHS ambulances queuing up outside hospitals, which isn't really happening. Yeah, it was just a good start to the year, and it seems like this year they've just gone full in with the psyops right now. You know.
So the thing that's interesting about I was aware that Pele had died, and I'm aware the only reason I know who Pele is because I did gymnastics with a girl who was also a soccer player, right? She was a couple of years younger than me, but she lived very close to me, right? In fact, she lived right in the area of Chatsworth that I speak about all the time on shows. And what's funny is like her name was Kimmy Pickup, right? Like literally like a pickup truck, and I would pick her up and take her to gym, right? So it's come almost like some sort of like what do you call it? When you reaffirm what you're like, when something says exactly what it is or exactly what's happening, right? But she was a nice kid, and she was a very average gymnast, but a very good soccer player, right? She did end up getting a soccer scholarship to college. In fact, I think she went to Santa Clara University, which is highly correlated with Jesuit rule, if you're familiar with that at all. But she told me about Pele. I had never heard of Pele before. Like I didn't know. I thought Pele was like a grocery store or a bag of chips or something like that, right? I had no idea what it was. So she enlightened me about the soccer star Pele. And I've heard his name brought up a few times over the years, by other athletes who are considered goats in their sport or whatever, right? But that's it. And I find it fascinating that is sort of happening simultaneous with all of these protests and whatever they are about Bolsonaro, the election between Bolsonaro and Lula, right? I just looked up just to see which was sort of winning the media battle for attention in Brazil. So I looked up Pele death versus Bolsonaro protests. And there's way more stories about Pele than there are about what's going on with the protests around the politics. So I thought that was kind of interesting about where we are, and to your point, right? Go ahead.
Pele's referred to as the king of soccer, the king of football. So as another king, a king death ritual. And so Brazil's got its own exact January 6th style QAnon Trump thing going on, right? And they've even got their own like Brazilian version of the Q shaman running around with his horns and get up.
Do they really?
Oh yeah, it's like a mirror image of the January 6th situation you had at the Capitol building. Yeah. They're storming the Capitol. They've got their own Q movement on. Now I'm not clued up on the conspiracy theories that are floating around Brazil, but it would be interesting to know if there is a Brazilian Q movement, as in Trump QAnon queuing. Are you seeing? Oh yeah.
Dude. Wow. Okay. So I have
what did you type in out of interest? What did you to get that image?
Typed in Brazilian QAnon shaman. So I was listening to Glenn Greenwald the other day talk about things that people don't understand about what's going on in Brazil, because he lives there, right? And I take Glenn Greenwald with a grain of salt, but you can definitely glean some things from the way he talks about things, right? So he was basically saying that the comparison of Bolsonaro to Donald Trump, and like the parallels being drawn by the media between the scenario in Brazil and what goes on here, is just entirely a creation of the media. That there's almost no correlation between Brazil's history and the United States' history, between the way the system works in Brazil and the way it works here, between like all that kind of stuff. The only similarity is that there are a few personality characteristics that are similar between Bolsonaro and Trump. And then at a certain point, like, maybe Bolsonaro saw how well Trump used like memes and controversy to parlay them into more attention or benefit to him somehow, and maybe began sort of emulating some of that a little bit, but really only because the media was already casting him as Trump anyway, right? And so apparently this, like and I think this might be something that harkens to the kind of perspective you have on things, that to the extent that whatever we had here in the United States was sort of stage managed, it was the one in Brazil was even further stage managed, in that the new president, Lula, like Bolsonaro had already left the country. Lula was not even at wherever the government is located. I can't remember if it's Sao Paulo, Rio, or whatever. He was out of town on a trip to somebody's funeral or something like that. And that there was no activities going on. So like when the thing went on here, like the whole deal was like, oh, they were interrupting an actual thing going on in they're trying to certify the election, or the Congress is meeting or whatever. Apparently it was like empty buildings, right? So there was none of the people who they were trying to affect or change minds of were actually there, right? So it was kind of interesting to listen to him talk about that, how I wasn't clear because I only listened to a clip because it wasn't the whole show, if his point was that the whole thing was performative in nature, or that the thing that happened in Brazil shouldn't really be controversial because there was no threat, right? But what you're showing me here, I was not aware of this QAnon shaman thing. Like, this is kind of fascinating.
I don't know. You know of you speak to Project Cheney, right? You know Project Cheney.
I've spoken to her. She's been on my show, and I will be on another show with her next month. But yes, we text a little bit back and forth on the phone and stuff like that. Yeah.
I hope I'm pretty sure it's Project Cheney. But she was at the January 6th, the US one, and her experience sounds exactly like my experience of being in Kiev during the Battle of Kiev. I'm pretty sure her exact words were, when I got there, it felt like I was on a movie set.
So that's interesting. I know that she is more politically active than like a lot of other people in this space. Like, I think most of the people that she would consider her friends and peers in the alternative media are probably more to the voluntarist, anarchist, libertarian bent, right? Whereas she is a little bit more like involved in politics, and I think she would claim a degree of patriotism that the rest of us would not claim, which I think is just part of the fascinating makeup of her character. She's a really interesting person. I think she calls herself like a patriot witch or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? She's an interesting person for sure. But I wasn't aware that she had been there. And I find her to be a person of incredibly sound mind and very insightful, who like from a completely different angle often arrives at some of the same strange thoughts that you or I arrive at, right? Her entry point is very different. And she's incredibly tolerant of others and able to take a good teasing and dish it out as well and whatever. So that's interesting. I did not know that. I have not had that conversation with her, nor have I heard her talk about that. I mean, the whole thing is so. So I go to this. Well, I don't really go there anymore. Like, we had a bad experience now, so probably not going back. But this wasn't the bad experience. This hair salon that I go to here in Austin, right? It's kind of a uppity type of place, and the owner is a gay gentleman, as you would expect, but he's from the South, right? He's from Louisiana. And so while I believe he's pretty left, but mostly from the perspective probably of like his experience as a gay man, right? But he's also very, very comfortable and tolerant of people, Republicans and people with old money and all that kind of stuff, because he grew up around it, right? And that's been his clientele here, to a certain degree. At a certain point, I mean, it shifted where his salon is located now is more like younger people, but where he came up was kind of different. But he was telling me about a client that he has, that a woman that is in the military, that she flies helicopters for the army, right? And that he was fascinated at the fact that she believed, as a person who flies helicopter from the army, she believed that the entire thing was set up and stage managed, right? And he was having trouble. Like, he was humored by this. He wasn't like calling her, insane or anything like. I mean, maybe he thinks she's insane, but she's a client of his. He likes her, right? But he could not square away in his own mind how somebody who is like that highly skilled would believe something that somehow that, thousands or tens of thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of people could be that many things and people could be controlled, right? Now, I'm sure this is a person who has very little sort of awareness or knowledge of anything in the sort of alternate reality or conspiratorial realm. I'm talking about him. But he was like, he called her like a full-on QAnon person. And he just, I remember him telling me he wasn't being mean. He wasn't like calling her, stupid or crazy, but he could not square that away in his mind about how such a large movie set could be constructed, right?
Well, he's going to be shocked at my kind of work then, like, because this is what I do, right? I explain how you can find yourself in a performance. You, a regular person, can find yourself in the illusion operation,
Well, I think the only thing, like, it can be really simple too. Once you wall off an area and control the pace at which people enter and exit it, you have already created a false environment.
Yep.
Right. And so, I mean, I think the thing that stuck with me most about your original thread, that I looked at before I knew you, was the part about how they were managing the train station and how they were building up this idea that there was tons of people, waiting to just, hoping to get on a train out of there. Right. And that there was just these unbelievable crowds. But they weren't letting you know that they were, basically locking people out after in or out after a certain time. So that you don't actually have to do much after that. You're creating a false clogging, right? Or the false impression of a line. So if if you're waiting in line outside and they're they're letting people believe that they're waiting in line because it's so many people who are trying to get out that the train station can't possibly hold them, is very different than the train station is locked and there's no one inside. So of course there's a line on the outside.
Yeah, I mean, so simple, but it works, right? You just bottleneck them. You close all the entrances, so there's only one entrance. You bottleneck them all, and then you set up the cameras right at that point, so it catches that sliver of the. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's just so easily done, right?
And then you trap others inside who can't get out, even though there's not going to be another train till 8 o'clock in the morning. So it isn't like the trains are stuffed and running all the time, but you're not letting them out. You're not letting the other people in. So you're able to create two separate but related sort of movie sets, if you will. Right. I mean, I'm really starting to take in your point about the Q movement, the QUEUE movement, right? Which is probably a better explanation for the other Q movement than almost anything else we've been offered. But the snaking lines, right? So it even just adds to this idea that there are so many people that give two shits about the queen, right? When obviously, just like you said here with Pele, that half the people in line didn't even really know who Pele was, right? They may, but if you have a single file line snaking around the city, right? And you're talking about a city, what's the population of London? How many million people?
It's meant to be 9 at the moment.
9 million. So when you're saying that like the line stretches for miles, you have to assume that this has got to be hundreds of thousands of people, right? Where the truth probably is that if you just stuffed all those people into a crowd right in front of the building, it wouldn't look that much different than a concert.
Yeah.
right? And you know, the idea that one is, you know, miles or hours away from their destination, where if we were all standing there in front, a big person could storm their way through that audience in seconds or minutes, or maybe a little person who could kind of scurry between, right? And there's not really that great of a distance between you and your perceived goal or whatnot. So this sort of creating false barriers, right? Creating these barriers and controlling the flow into and out of something, like you don't even necessarily have to do that much stuff other than that already creates a controlled environment.
Oh yeah.
You know, what did she have anything else to say, Cheney, about, have you ever spoken to her? You guys would probably like each other.
No, but yeah, I definitely think we should
I'll arrange a three-way. And I'll just observe and let you two have at it.
But I remember her saying like they shuttled the transport down when it ended. So she had to walk through a really bad neighborhood, right? And yet again, this all backs up my whole thing of an illusion operation is aimed at your physical senses. So for her, like she's obviously aware of the situation, but for the regular Joe that had to walk through a bad neighborhood in the freezing cold, you know, he or she is going to remember that for the rest of their life. The fear they felt, the cold on their skin, their feet were probably hurting when they've been walking for so long. And then it implants the memory. And it, you know, my whole thing is that the illusion operation backs up the psychological operation that goes in tandem with it. So when you go and say to someone, hey, do you think that might have been fake or not real? Or they'll say, how dare you? I had to walk through a bad neighborhood with sore feet in the freezing cold, needing a piss. I remember it, you know, and they remember the senses. So okay. It creates the illusion of everything being real because you will remember the time your physical senses were here.
You just said something. I was about to walk you towards another part of this story, and then without even knowing it, you just fed right into what I was going to say. But I want to respond to what you said real fast, and then I'll take you there. On the flip side, well, let's remind me, I want to tell you about the Obama inauguration because it's the same thing, but in reverse. We'll come back to that after we deal with this because I want to stay on topic of January 6th here. I read an interesting article last night that I actually also linked to from Revolver, which is where I originally found you. Are you familiar with the narrative around this gentleman named Ray Epps from January 6th?
The name rings a bell, but no, not the exact story. But that name's going around a lot, yeah.
So he is the guy who was captured on video the night before telling people that tomorrow we need to go into the Capitol, right? And then the day of, he was there, he was right in the location of the first breach into the Capitol. But for some reason, the January 6th committee and the FBI and whatever, they're not interested in this person, right? They've arrested all these other people whose phones just say they were in the area. But this guy who's been captured on video, literally encouraging people to do the thing that happened the next day. They, you know, not only did they show no interest, but they've actively made excuses for why what he was doing was okay and blah, 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 right? The implication obviously being that he was somehow involved or some kind of infiltrator or asset or operative or whatever. You know, and the Revolver, the guy who runs Revolver, Darren Beatty, has been, this is part of his original work and reporting, right? But finally, Ray Epps testified for the January 6th committee, and it was a long time before they released the transcripts of that. And it's long transcripts, and there's a bunch of ridiculous things in there, but somebody on their Substack read the whole thing and then highlighted the main points, kind of like what you did in Ukraine. They didn't do video, right? They read through the entire testimony and pulled like 11 or 12 points that are just so ridiculous that it just exposes the insanity of the whole thing, right? And one of the things that you were just talking about was part of his story, right? There's some unexplained time. Let me see if I can find the article so I can pull it up so people can go there on their own if they want to. But one of the things that was part of the story is it didn't make any sense. He had been on Friday night at the BLM, or January 5th, at the BLM Plaza, which is where he was caught on camera telling people to go into the Capitol the next day. And you can hear people in the audience saying, this guy must be a Fed or da-da-da or whatever, right? But then when that was over, somehow, even though he was only 8 minutes from his hotel, it took him 2 hours to arrive back at his hotel, right? And his whereabouts during that time are unknown. Obviously, the implication being, you know, there were some other stories around it about people he had interaction with and what their role could have been or whatnot. But he, you know, basically he was saying, I don't remember anything. I just remember having to walk back in the cold, having to take a wicked piss or something like that. Almost exactly what you said, right? So painting this picture, let me see if I can find the thing that I'm talking about here. So people can go and look.
Which, by the way, is what pretty much everyone running out of Kiev had to go through. Standing at a freezing cold train station, probably with a sore bladder where they were needing a piss, which makes the whole thing very real for them because they will always remember that.
I think this is it. Yeah, this is it right here. Ray Epps' so this is the Substack of Rahim Kassam. Ray the interview gets even weirder than his I orchestrated it text, right? And he goes through and does like 10 points or 12 points in the same way that you showed if you, right, you threaded your thing together. I'll link to this in the show notes here so people can go take a look for themselves. But there's this part in it, I just want to, that's almost exactly the sentence that you said, right? Where he was talking about having to take a piss, right? That he walked in the cold and had to take a piss. Let me see. I'm just looking through to see if I can find it. But yes,
because
for your point,
because Emily, there's like what the number is, you know, people argue about the number, but I think it's like 9. We've decided there's 9 senses, physical senses, right?
yeah.
And one of them is called I don't know, it's got a very scientific name, but it's basically your bladder control is one of your senses that goes along with seeing, hearing, tasting, balance, temperature. So yeah, I know it might sound very stupid to some people, a little thing of needing a piss, but that will add to your whole superficial, artificial experience of making something real.
Yeah, absolutely. Here it is right here. I misrecounted. This was him the next day on January 6th talking about how cold he was and how he had to take a wicked whiz. Right?
Wicked whiz.
Yeah. So to your point, so that you managed to kind of fall right into that. Yeah, I think that's right. That is, you know, so stopping public transit, i.e. turning the subways off, right, is very, very similar to closing the door at the train station, right? It creates an artificial flow scenario, right? And then people are having to walk in the cold and they might have to pee and it's the middle of the night. So there's no public restrooms open and da-da-da-da-da-da. And all of that adds to the lore, like my dad being out there and thinking he's looking at a line, right?
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, I was in Washington, D.C. on the inauguration day in 2009 when Barack Obama was inaugurated, right? So
can I just jump in there? One of the funniest things I heard like lately is when you told this to Danny Katz, and Danny Katz was like, "Whoa, hold up, what?"
Yeah, right.
And it made me laugh, like just the interaction between you two. But anyway, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no, right. So it was, I mean, I'm not going to tell the story again because obviously you've already heard it, but my point with it is, so yeah, like those were like the last days of disco, right? I was in my final days of my political programming, right? My entrance point was a little bit different. Like I didn't wake up based on something like happening in what we consider like the political realm or whatever. Like my further looking into wake up, I had 2 things kind of going on simultaneously: questions about 9/11, right? And which at that point, those questions more led me to believe that like to the extent that it was a false flag coming from the Bush wing of politics, right? So I was not yet questioning the Democrats, which I came from a left-leaning family. So questions about 9/11 and other things like what's it called, Oklahoma City and whatever, and then also information about MK Ultra. Like MK Ultra was really my main. If I had not come across some of that stuff early on in my waking up, like I don't know that I'd be here talking to you about this. I don't know that I ever would have, woken up to the extent that I did, or had some of the strange experiences that I had. But that, I got grabbed by that. Simultaneously, also the Gary Webb story, right? So the Iran-Contra and its connection to the crack cocaine epidemic in Los Angeles. So those three things kind of came together for me. And eventually it led to a political awakening a bit later, right? But I had voted for Barack Obama in 2008, right? And then we had gone to, we'd gone to Africa, to South Africa, Swaziland, and Mozambique. And people there seemed very moved by the fact that Americans had elected a Black man. It was like kind of crazy, some of the things we saw, right? And then upon return, my sister was living in DC at that time, so I stayed with her in DC for a couple of days, and that was what was going on, right? There was the inauguration, right? So that palpable energy, but now I have to ask questions about, it felt like there was so many people there, and there was so much energy and whatnot, right? And at that point, I'm still, wrapped up in the delusion. But I felt that like that level of energy I had only ever felt before at like raves, right? That level of like everybody moving in unison and sync and da-da-da-da, right? But now I wonder, like, was there really that many people? Like, or did they shut down transportation and close off streets? Right, to make it feel like the only way you were going to, you could only get you were miles back, right? Like miles back from where this was all happening, and just happy to be part of the crowd and right? Like how contrived and controlled was that, right? I mean, we've watched what they do when they want to make it look like there's a lot of people at like a Hillary Clinton rally or a Joe Biden speech or something like that, right? They'll cordon off an area and use camera tricks and whatever. I now have to question my own sense of that feeling there. Now, there was some energy that was palpable, but was it created, by cordoning off areas and making it seem like there was more people interested in getting close to Barack Obama than there really were?
Yeah. Were you in the Purple Tunnel? Do you remember the Purple Tunnel?
What's the Purple Tunnel?
Oh, we might have to do a quick Google search here.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, there was something called the Purple Tunnel, where people were trapped in a tunnel in a queue, and they all started singing like really uplifting songs, and the whole thing was like, look how amazing America is now that Obama's here. People are just singing together.
Oh my God, you're right. Okay, I've never heard of this. Let's pull this up.
I never heard of it till about 2 months ago. Is this one of these things they've added on into history
right
now? But also purple is the color of illusion, right? If you know your signs and symbols.
That's what I was just about to say. Like that brings us right back to the Queen and blah 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 blah, right?
Purple Tunnel of Doom.
Yeah,
I didn't know there's a Doom. Okay. Let's. This is going to be interesting.
Purple Tunnel of Doom was and take its Wikipedia, so a grain of salt. But
yeah.
Does specialize in color-coded realities. This might actually be pretty good. Purple Tunnel of Doom was the name ascribed to the I-395 3rd Street Tunnel in downtown Washington, D.C., where thousands of holders of purple tickets lined up to witness the first inauguration of Barack Obama. Ticket colors corresponded to assigned viewing areas. Many were not admitted despite having stood in line for hours. People were directed into the 3rd Street Tunnel by police, but were not allowed to exit. Among those, that's fucking crazy, dude, right? Among those who missed the ceremony were Seattle Mayor Greg Nichols, that's an interesting name, San Mateo County Supervisor Warren Slocum, and daughters of Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, the chief legislative counsel for Lamar Alexander. staffers for John Barroso, and foreign policy advisors and multiple members of the staff from the Obama campaign. News reports put the total number of purple ticket holders who were denied entrance to the inauguration at between 1 and 4,000. Pictures show a lack of law enforcement or event personnel and an overall bleak situation without basic amenities such as wayfinding or facilities. Similarly affected were blue ticket holders on the south side of the Capitol. Thousands of ticket holders waiting outside the Blue Gate in and around the triangular area bordered by C Street, 2nd Street, Washington Avenue, Southwest were denied entrance as a result of a massive gate management failure. Terrence Gaynor and the Sergeant of Arms of the United States Senate. Oh, that's interesting. Remember the Sergeant at Arms role in the January 6th thing stated that it appeared that the breakdown had occurred because there were more purple and blue tickets for those sections than bulky people in coats would permit. It's the good old bulky coat excuse. The experience in the tunnel has been chronicled in numerous videos on YouTube and detailed accounts by the Huffington Post. They knew exactly how many ticket holders there were. They knew people would show up early in massive numbers. They had months to prepare, and their planning was clearly woefully inadequate and put thousands of people at risk of injury. How is it like? So this is almost exactly the same thing. You know, it's
Right.
slightly different scenario, but they're very practiced at creating areas that are intentionally closed and areas that are intentionally let open. Who fucking decided to open the doors at the Capitol, right? Like on January 6th, like, you know, you see that there's those videos of police like ushering people in, right? So when you do this thing like letting people in and then stopping and not letting other people in and whatever, like we can't say anything is an organic scenario at all. Let's forget any other. We could eliminate all other possible conspiracies and all of that kind of stuff by controlling the flow artificially, by sometimes opening it, sometimes closing it without there being like a known and understood protocol for that, right? Like when you go to a nightclub, and I'm not saying that isn't a controlled environment too, but I think you've worked as a bouncer at a nightclub before, haven't you?
I've served my time as a nightclub bouncer. Yeah.
Okay, right. You generally
Anytime.
they
Yeah.
have a clicker in their hands, right? Like
Yep.
let's just like this is not when they're doing the thing where they are making a false line outside to make the club appear more busy than it is, and then you go inside and there's two people inside dancing, right? That's not what I'm talking about. Let's pretend for a second that things are not conspiratorial in nature, but you know that the club has a capacity of 300 people. Right. And so you're keeping count of how many people have gone in. And once you hit that limit, then you understand that like someone has to come out before someone else can go in. And everybody knows that, right? Everybody understands that that's what's happening there. These situations are not that. There's no door person that's keeping count. There's no assigned limit on how much a space can hold that everybody understands the protocol around. And so you are literally controlling people's perception in the same way that when they fake having a line outside into the nightclub, so some schmuck going by thinks there's going to be a lot of hot girls in there, and then they get inside and there's like two skinny Asian men dancing in front of the speaker, right? You know, then it's like they were psyoped, right? It's the same thing. It's not different.
Yeah. Right.
Well,
And
I wasn't aware.
also looking at the dates, 20th of January, 20 committee right there.
Yep.
That's the XX. But that's also between the 20th and the 22nd is like the New Year's, right? According to like Chinese astrology, or if you're going on lunar cycles, that around that time is the New Year. So in that, there's probably something energetically important about that. And I'm just looking there. I mean, the video I saw, they were all just singing in harmony. There was no doom about it. It was all like they were praising it as like, look how beautiful it is. But who started that chant and singing and stuff? There had to be your actors in there, your agent provocateurs, just making the whole thing happen. But yeah, this is, and also Emily, this is why I don't believe we will ever step into a Ready Player One style metaverse, because what we got right now is so perfect for creating a false perception of reality with doing things like this that you won't be able to do if someone has a VR goggle set on their head, because you can make people stand in the freezing cold, needing a piss, or trap them in a tunnel which will then sculpt their whole reality and make them believe something is happening which is not.
So, okay, so this opens up an interesting, first of all, as we're talking about this, I'm starting to question my own memories about that day. Like, I'm starting to think of like, did we actually go down there, or are we just sitting on the couch watching? And if, right, like, and so think about all these people who are violently upset about whatever happened on January 6th who weren't there, right? So I'm going to talk to my sister now. Not that her memory is any more accurate than mine, but I'm going to visit my sister this week. So I'm going to ask her what she remembers about that period of time, right? And see if it matches up to mine, and see if, like, it's weird what's happening right now, right? And it's awful to admit that someone who thinks they've become slightly better at not getting fooled than the average person might not be any better at all, just different, right? But I want to talk about what you just said about the Ready Player One. But all this talk about having to take a piss has made me have to take one. So I'm going to hit pause for 1 second and can then come right back.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I'm easily influenced. So have you ever heard the gentleman I've had on my show a couple of times? Things have been rough for him. He was supposed to come back for a third one, and we were actually going to talk about this, but he's had a couple of losses in his family and whatnot. But have you ever listened to any of those shows I did with a guy named Lookout for Charlie? He's the person who like takes the audio recordings and you can hear all of the like background noise and interference, and how bizarre it is that there seems to be always voices chatting about exactly what's going on in the room where things are being recorded.
No, I haven't. I remember when you recorded with him, but I don't think no, I don't remember that. So I probably haven't listened to it.
Okay, so it's fascinating, right? Like he can go and the way he first became hip to the fact that there seemed to be like what he calls some kind of like chatterbots or some sort of like surveillance weaponry that has nothing to do with necessarily targeting an individual, though he's not saying that never happens, but it's not something that's only being applied to specific people. It's like it's a reality wide something that's going on. He had a friend staying with him, was sleeping on the couch in his living room, right? And he walked in and she was talking in her sleep, right? And so when she woke up, he laughed at her and teased her and whatnot. She didn't believe him. So the next day it was happening again. So this time he recorded it, right? So he could play it back to her. And he decided, because he's an audio engineer person, to just put it into his system and like analyze it and see, because some of it seemed like nonsense. And what he could hear was there was literally another voice that you couldn't hear when you were standing in the room that was having the opposite part of the conversation with her. So she was having a back and forth with someone that couldn't be heard in the room. But when he put it into his system and filtered out certain other things, you could literally hear the other half of the conversation. Right.
Wow.
And so, right. And so now what he does, he goes and he listens to recordings from events that we've had our attention unnaturally drawn to, or sometimes just takes recordings from things going on in certain locations that he's at. And, you can literally hear voices in the background seeming to say things that are related to whatever is going on in that environment, even though the person thinks that they're alone in the room. Almost like we're in some sort of terrarium that has people observing it from the outside and commenting on what the people inside are doing. Right?
Wow.
So
I'm this is kind of sends a bit of a chill down your spine, doesn't it?
Like totally. So one of the things we were going to talk about when he came back was he had made a video about the documentary that recently came out about Woodstock 99. Are you familiar with Woodstock 99?
Not the documentary, but Woodstock, yeah.
Okay, so this documentary came out on, I think it was Netflix or Prime just last year, right? And it talked about all the things that were sort of going on there. And he to him from his, this took place on an old military base, and you're in this situation like we've talked about, like people stuck inside there, limited water, limited food, like all kinds of crazy shit going on. It erupted into absolute chaos by the time it was over, right? But what was interesting is he took samples from the documentary, if I'm recalling correctly, it was several months back now. And then he also went to see if he could find original recordings that people had taken from their own video cameras and posted on YouTube that weren't coming out through Netflix, right? And he was literally able to find in recordings that people took then. And it's funny, he said like he could tell, he's developed the ability to tell when something has been artificially altered to remove that background sound, right? But he was able to find some recordings and able to pick up in the background what literally seemed like, and if I'm getting some of the terminology wrong, it's accidental, not intentional. Like what you would, he could hear it, like, when you're, when they're doing, when security guards, like the Secret Service, they have their own lines that they're communicating with each other across, right?
Yep.
Like it's a different broadcast channel, that he's able to pick up things being discussed about what's going on as if it were an orchestrated military operation, right? Straight down to like, just random people in the crowds, phones, like recordings, like picking that up on a back channel, but you can't hear it when you just listen to the video. You have to put it through the software thing and pull out some of the sounds above it. And then you can literally hear people discussing what's happening in real time. Right, like commenting on like individuals and whatever, right? Like at a crazy level. This was back in 1999, right? But it's on a military base, and so that would be a place where whatever this kind of broadcast technology or whatever was, that would be a likely space for it, right? I'm sure I'm getting some details wrong, but I'm giving you the general idea here. So I remember, I'm not generally attracted to large events like that, particularly if they're large events far away from a city, right? Like it just always feels like not what I want to do. But I've been to a few like massives or festivals, and I generally don't like them. I stopped going to that early on in my dance music life, right? I went to a few. I'm just saying, I don't really like this. I like small to medium size events better, right? But I did know, I remember meeting this girl in Los Angeles in 1999 who had been to Woodstock 99, and she told me that it changed her life, right? That it was like the best thing she'd ever been to, right? And then you can go online and find all of these people reporting how it changed their life, and it was literally the worst thing that ever happened to them. Right. And you go watch this documentary, and the documentary is actually reasonably good, but the amount of things that go unsaid that it actually reveals for people with a discerning eye and ear is far more interesting than what they actually talk about, though that's interesting as well. Right. So the fact that you have people go to something where under every nobody thinks that it wasn't a chaotic mess, right? But for some people, that chaotic mess was one, they loved it, just like some people loved the Obama inauguration or whatever it is, right? And for other people, like it was crazy. But we're talking about a scenario where the music stars had to be evacuated from the location because it got dangerous. Fires broke out, all kinds of crazy things happened. And when you look at the people who were involved in putting it on, it paints a very suspicious picture, right? But within that environment, you can hear the exact same things in the background that he hears in the background of convenience stores being robbed, false flags occurring, all that kind of stuff, where there literally seems to be some sort of conversation going on about what's happening in any said location, including in somebody's bedroom in their own private house, right? Like he's picked up these recordings. It's crazy. So
I got a million things to throw in there, but I'll let you finish.
Go. That's it. Go for it.
Wow. I'm getting Westworld vibes. Like you're overhearing the park operators, you know. You know,
Yep.
the guys that go and clean stuff up, or they're monitoring you, or they're making sure that, you know, if you end up in a prison, they're like, oh, okay, we'll let him sit in prison for a bit. Then we'll set up a prison breakout in a cell next to him. He'll jump out. It's like that. It's like you're overhearing the park operators. When I came back from Ukraine the first time, I was seeing a lot of shadow beings. Like, I'm sure you've heard that term, right? Shadow beings, like in
Yes.
the corner of your eye, it feels like something's sitting over there. And you look and you just see a black shadow like whip away,
Yep.
or outside, hovering outside your window, or you're asleep and you feel something above you and you see it. And I'm going to assume that's because I had so much energy swirling around me, you know, from going viral and all that, and even from all that the negative energy from all the death threats. I just had so much energy swirling around my body that something was coming to have a look. Like, what is this being, and why is so much energy, you know, swirling around his being? Because essentially I was a vampire for a split sec. I was a digital vampire. Like, I was putting stuff out on the internet and it was really triggering people, good, bad, whatever. And it unintentionally, I'm not trying to be a vampire, but people were throwing their energy at me, whether it's through love or hate.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that. But also, to add another layer to that, I also went online, and when I was catching up with videos, I was actually coming across a lot of people at that period of time were also seeing shadow beings. So maybe it wasn't just me, and maybe the whole Ukraine operation was to divert people away from, maybe we've got visitors in that month, February, or sorry, the date of 2222. Maybe the gateway opened and these shadow beings come through. I don't know. Lots of things to discuss there.
Well, I'm
Another thing,
like go finish.
I've just finished. I work up on a dementia ward quite a lot, right? You know that, right? For people that don't know, on the weekends I work in a hospital and I deal with challenging behavior, like people being violent and aggressive, whatever. I have to like one-to-one them. I'm quite often up on a dementia ward because people with dementia are so confused, they become violent and whatever. It's quite fun up there. But I see this all the time. People with dementia, they narrate what's happening in front of them. They'll be like, oh, nurse is walking in the room, nurse is pouring out a cup of tea, nurse is handing me a cup of tea, I'm drinking a cup of tea. You know, they're narrating their own life. And when you ask them, hey, how come you're narrating like that? And they don't have an answer, they just laugh. Also, last time we recorded, Emily, I was a bit spaced out, right? Because I'd just been to Avery Stone Circle and I had a bit of a fever. But when I listened to it back, I could hear myself talking when you were talking, but whispering. And I've noticed, I kind of don't notice it, but people notice I talk to myself a lot, where I'm having a conversation in my head, but my lips are moving at the same time. So I would probably come up on the recording as well.
Okay,
And that's why this time I'm very hot on switching my mic off, because yeah, last time, if anyone wants to go back and listen, you can hear me as Emily's talking. I'm already answering the question. I'm already like building up a response in my head. I'm saying it through my lips, but I don't know I'm doing it. So yeah, over to you, Emily.
Okay, so you just said a lot of fascinating stuff. So I want to hit on your experience when you come back from Ukraine. I want to hit on dementia, and then I want to hit on your whispering under your breath kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So I'm starting to think that whenever you're wanting to make a malleable environment for whatever reason, that radiation is always involved. So what would have been fascinating would have been if you had some sort of radiation detector. I think they call them Geiger counters or something like that, right?
Yeah.
With you, and you were measuring, because I think what happens is that cesium or whatever different things they're using to create specific radioactive effects, and I don't think all radiation is the same, somehow thins a veil between frequency bands or dimensions, right? And because you were in what may have been a highly radiated environment even before any action really started, right? Though that creates a good excuse for why radiation would be detected in the area later, right? Mm-hmm. And remember, early on, we were having our attention focused to, oh no, if they shell Chernobyl, right, we're going to have a problem kind of thing, right? And I think these nuclear places are where things cross through. Right. And there's lots of places that you wouldn't associate with nuclear sites that have high radiation levels, but for sure, they're concentrated in some of these areas. It would have been interesting to measure that, and then also to measure like the reading around you for a period of time after you returned, right? And seeing if that was creating like a thinning of the veil effect, not only for you, but for people around you, right?
Yeah.
Watch Dark, right? They're dealing with cesium as the mechanism for time travel, right? And dimensional travel using different technologies slightly, right? And it's interesting that the technologies being used mimic plane or sphere. So flat Earth or round Earth on a certain level, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But the effects on the people who were traveling are very different than the effects on the people who were around the people who were traveling or involved, right? So
Mm-hmm.
some people travel and some people get cancer, and other people just have chaos in their life based on being in proximity to these people,
Oh,
right?
wow.
So right, it's very, some have strange behavior, right? But it seems like one pole is time travel or dimensional travel, the opposite pole is cancer, and then in between those poles are a range of anomalous activity or behavior, right? So it would
I don't want to like ruin the story for people, but can you tell us, is that controllable, or is that down to genetics? Is that out of your hands? Like, you don't know until you try whether you're going to jump in time or get cancer, or can you train yourself to be a time traveler? Is it
so
without? I'm sure people. Go on.
So all kinds of things are displayed in the show. Everything, right? People who are literally physically traveling through use of this passageway that's been found, right? People that seem to be doing it like the old-fashioned way based on being a dreamer or an energetic being, and then others who are using devices, right? And sometimes the device being of their own creation, and other times using a device that someone has given them. And these devices range from small handhelds to giant nuclear reactor, God particle accelerator kinds of things, right? So it's definitely making the case that travel can be achieved all kinds of ways. The character with cancer is not really doing any of this, but she is having relationships with people who are either travelers or people working at the facility around which all of this traveling is occurring, right? So I think that, I don't think we have an answer. This is my biggest question. What are all of the possibilities around the idea of nuclear fusion or nuclear reaction and the different kinds of elements that are part of that? And what role does genetics play? And some of the threads that Jeff and I have been putting together is it seems like all of the same people who are highly interested in nuclear facilities or nuclear kinds of stuff also are interested in genetics. And my guess would be that there's two possibilities or more, but at least two. And one is that the number of places or the exact locations or the range that you have is somewhat dependent on your genetics. So if we look at genetics as a key, it determines which rooms you can go into in the house, right? Or the other, so that could be one reason. Another thing could be your genetics determine how being in a nuclear or radiated environment will affect you. And for some people, it seems to create these transcendent experiences, transcending the rules and boundaries of space or time or dimension or whatever. And for other people, it seems to trigger this inner collapse of something inside their system, i.e., cell membrane penetration and cancer and blood-brain barrier problems and all kind of stuff, right? And, and my guess is that there's probably some of each. That's probably why they're so interested in genetics, is both for the places it can take you and the problems or solutions it can cause or solve, right? But there's 100% correlation between genetics and health and radiation-induced time travel. Like particle accelerators are used to find the God particle, create black holes, supposedly from what they tell us. From our own assumptions, rip holes in the fabric of space and time, and therefore allow for time or dimensional travel. But we have that. But also, if you look into how medications and treatments are created, they use desktop linear particle accelerators, small versions, to do that. So there's something about achieving a certain velocity that creates something that breaks down barriers, or builds them up.
Did you just say there's desktop particle accelerators?
Yeah, I'll show you. So desktop. In fact, when I was looking into particle accelerators in Chatsworth, I found there's a company that creates desktop here, Berkeley Labs, right? So this is one of the places that cousin's father worked that I often talk about, right? So Berkeley Labs builds a desktop particle accelerator. Let's see if there's a picture here, right? So there it is, right? Now,
so why is there a huge, gigantic one and a desktop one? What's the difference? Is it supposed to be a bigger effect, right? When it's scaled up.
I think it would be like similar to like having a train set in your living room or actually riding on a train to another city or state or country or whatever, right? So linear accelerators and drug development, right? This is big in development of pharmaceuticals and drugs, right? A medical linear accelerator customizes high energy X-rays or electrons to confirm a tumor shape. So it's used to detect things, but it's also used to develop drugs, medications. Let me see if I can find an article about that. Medication development. Let me see. The adaptation of the linear accelerator to medical use in design. I can't find a thing about the drug development. I'll have to look. But there was literally a company in Chatsworth that creates medications. We're looking for someone who's expert at operating a desktop particle accelerator. That was what clued me into that when I was doing some research probably a year ago or so. MRIs use linear accelerators, right? So there's something about this technology that is useful in both arenas. And we see that in the way all of these stories play out around that stuff. So in Chatsworth, myself, Andrew Bashago, I'm sure other people have had all of this anomalous experience, including there seemed to be a cluster of wealthy people who want to live around there. And it doesn't make sense that wealthy people would want to live in a place that's leaking something that might give them cancer, although some of them may be willing to risk that if they also thought they could achieve immortality or time travel or dimensional travel or whatever. And at the same time, there's warnings for people to stay off of that land because they might develop cancer. It's a really good way to limit the number of people that will come close to those who are either part of the project in the know or willing to take a chance. And those who are willing to take a chance are probably better candidates for that kind of travel anyway, because they're not going to lose their shit when it happens.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. So those things are inextricably connected, in my opinion, right? The genetics and dimensional and time travel. So basically like nuclear and genetics, right? And I'm still sussing out what all the possible connections can be, but some of the biggest supercomputers ever built that are used to track medical records and genetics and things like that are highly correlated with nuclear facilities. Like Oracle has this project at Livermore Laboratory, and I'm 100% sure. So Oracle is largely in charge at this point of keeping track of like the vaccine adverse event thing and all of that type of stuff. But why they would have a project at Livermore Laboratory, like I don't think that they have to have a huge project there to keep track of their employees' medical records. It's something else is going on, right? You know, to the tunes of billions of dollars. And also, if you look at all of these companies that are keeping track of people's medical records and genetics, their buildings all look like genetic marker tests as well. It's almost like it's they're creating, it's like when you, what is it called when you create something that looks like the thing it's like a special kind of talisman or like a memento or like
residual.
Yeah, it's right. Yeah. So it's kind of crazy. The next thing, there was something else that I said about, what did I want to say about the last thing?
Dementia or
dementia.
Or whispering. Yeah.
Isn't it weird that the word dementia, though spelled differently, sounds like dimension or dimensional?
Oh yeah.
Right. Like I have thought about creating a party called Dementia. right? But spelling it like dimension. So DIMENS, right? Like making it okay. I could, but it's the same word. Dimension, dementia, right?
Yep.
Like, I think it's entirely possible that these people are just like the things that they're experiencing or commenting on or talking about. And this goes for, schizophrenia and things like that as well. Although I think like it might be slightly different in each case, who knows, right? But they're literally actually interacting and commenting on something that's going on at another frequency. And when it becomes like to the place where like my mom is basically catatonic at this point, right? She hardly talks. She seems completely out of it. I think it's just the brain being fried because maybe she's seeing them all at once and she just can't even keep track of it anymore. So she just completely has shut down, right? But my guess would be that like there would be a huge amount of crossover between someone who's considered psychic or with extrasensory perception or the ability to remote view. If they viewed the room, right, and were able to get a hit on it, that they would be seeing a lot of the same things that the quote unquote crazy person is talking about. The crazy person just is not able to differentiate what's happening at what layer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I love being up there because it's just such a, if you don't believe in the woo woo, you will after working on a dementia ward. And talk about time travel. Like some of them are, think they're still in their 30s. They've reverted back to being in their 30s or being 8 years old. They're asking where their mum is and stuff, but they're not doing it they're doing it in like it's not as bad as it seems. You know what I mean? They can still walk and talk and do everything. They're just in a different time zone in their head. Now, funny enough, when you were just saying about you're thinking back to the Obama inauguration, straight away I thought of you've seen the Butterfly Effect, the film. He's changed. He's changed. Well, I'll tell you now. He's changing. He's going back in time through memory. So he'll go back in his memory, alter something, and come back. And you might have just done that. You might have just Butterfly Effect yourself. We had a discussion about the whole situation being fake. You might have you yourself being a particle accelerator. You might have just winged yourself back there, changed it in your mind, and come back. And now it's a fake event because you just went back in time and changed it. Butterfly Effect right there.
I'm going to put out a show that I recorded a few weeks back with Chris from The Melt, where we were talking about, like altering outcomes through retrocausality, right? So basically, like we were talking about it in terms of, we were having a little bit of conversation about what Mike Williams has done with all of his work on the Beatles psyop thing, right? And the question came up, is he creating these effects by what he's saying about them to a certain extent, like affecting outcomes retrocausally, right? Like he showed interest in this and he started unwinding this, and more and more and more and more and more things start to come sort of unglued. How much of it is that we're just discovering something had happened, and how much of it is that our attention and the things that we say, like, I wonder if this could have happened. And then suddenly you find that. Like I talk about this with the scenario with Chatsworth for me, and being unable to find, information to confirm theories that I had for a long time. But then I continued talking about it to the point that some of the best kind of evidence you could ask for appeared, right? Like we don't understand time, and we don't understand cause and effect to the extent that we think we do. Right.
Yeah.
So I think your point there is really good. But if you spend enough time around people who have been written off as having dementia or schizophrenia or certain aspects of bipolar and the manic state and whatnot, if you're around them long enough, or if you're around people who are super paranoid on drugs, right? Like there's a cohesive narrative largely to what they're talking about. Like some people are just, it's impossible to put it together, right? But other people, when they're in a certain location, it's always the same fucking thing they start talking about, right? And you can be in another location and they don't act like that, right? There's something about like the frequency or the energy or the reality or the radiation level maybe of wherever they are when they start to seemingly have a merger of realities happening that makes them feel the need to explain what's going on in front of their face, and some of it makes sense to you and some of it doesn't. And then they become accustomed to narrating everything, to maybe keep track in their own head of who they are, what they are, and where they are.
Yeah. Because also it ties into the whole, NPC thing on a real basis, where there's actually been studies to the effect where they pretty much say only 30% of people have got an inner dialogue, right? The vast majority of humans on Earth don't have an inner dialogue. So they're not speaking to themselves. They're not having a conversation in their head or pre-answering questions or whatever, right? And that's crazy. And they look at us as crazy, and we look at them as like, they can't believe that we have a voice in our head. We can't believe they haven't got a voice in their head. So yeah, again, can the Westworld, I call them the Westworld robot. I know it's quite harsh, but there might be some people that are just not able to time travel and do these kinds of things because they haven't got that voice in their head, And also, when you said about, you're talking about nuclear power plants and stuff, to bring it into Westworld, the nuclear power plant stereotypical uniform is identical to the guys that come and clean up, right? I forgot what they're called, like the mop-up crew.
Hazmat, also astronauts.
Yeah. Because if you go back to season 1 of Westworld, which is really the main one, like the others are kind of garbage in comparison, that's the whole thing, right? Maeve keeps having drawings and recollections of seeing these alien kind of hazmat suit beings, and they are the park operators. That when you're shut down, when your unit is shut down, they are going in, like the Adjustment Bureau, tinkering around, changing the scenery, doing what they got to do to make the Westworld show carry on.
Yep. Yeah. No, I mean, you're right. The hazmat suit and which I guess I think at least the acknowledged explanation for the suits that they wear in the nuclear power plants would be that it's hazardous material, right? But if you think about it, like these same, like the place in Chatsworth where they have nuclear reactors, and they're also part of Rocketdyne or Boeing where they're test launching rockets, right? So astronauts, right? Maybe these right kind of thing. I don't think there is rocket launching going on. I think that there's particle accelerator experimentation in hyperspace going on, but astronauts wear a remarkably similar uniform to hazmat suits that people wear when they're cleaning up spills or working in nuclear facilities. Right? Or going around someone who's supposedly contagious. And what if what we think of as like germ contagious is really just this person has a nuclear field around them that is going to cause distortions, and this is what quarantining is really about? What if that's what was really going on? Like, what if something happened that radiated our environment to like such an extent, right, that and for some people's bodies like something happens in some people's bodies that generate a bigger field than others, right? But the best thing to do is to keep people quarantined so you're not walking into somebody else's expanded reality field, right? Like, I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do with that. But yeah, there's no that the resemblance of the outfit of space travel and nuclear cleanup is or if you watch like Ancient Aliens, you ever watch Ancient Aliens, right? You find all of these old cave drawings with people that look like they're wearing astronaut suits or nuclear hazmat suits, right? And it's fascinating because you're like, well, wow, that's interesting. We didn't know that they had that back then. Well, it's not. Time is not how we think. Dimensions are not how we think. So, something happens back then and they're getting a peep into the future, or it's retrocausal or whatever it is. And they're like, wow, this is fucking weird. I better draw it on the wall because no one will believe it otherwise. Right.
Yeah.
So, okay. The last thing I wanted to comment on, and then I think maybe that's a good place to sort of wrap it up because we've kind of dumped a lot here. This has been pretty, from where we started to where we ended. It's pretty interesting. You're whispering to yourself. So I didn't notice that, so I'll go back. I will have to go back, check it out, right? But also I speak loud, and so being my mouth is near my ears, right? So there could be stuff happening that I wouldn't hear because it's so loud for me. But my mother's husband, so remember, my mother has dementia, right? Her husband is who is not my father. He talks to himself incessantly, but it's the weirdest fucking thing. And I've observed this like since I first ever lived with them for a period of time back when they first got married, right?
Mhm.
That whenever he thinks he's by himself in the room, he's whispering incessantly, right? Like not just like sometimes I'll talk to myself, but it's not like insistent, right? It's not like a impassioned dialogue generally. Like I tend more to like whistle, sing songs to myself. I might mutter a few things here or there, but I'm not having like an impassioned conversation either with myself or nobody the way I'm having it with you, even if it's at a whisper, right? So people talk to themselves. That's normal. My assumption would be that like particularly people who have active inner dialogues occasionally express something externally for a variety of reasons, right? But people talk to themselves. But this is different. This is incessant whispering, like under his breath, almost like, right? Like it's not, if you think you're alone in the room or the house, like why you'd pay such attention to keep it so low, right? So I noticed it immediately and I've commented on it for years. He never does it when either there's someone in the room or he doesn't know there's someone in the room or doesn't know he's being listened to or observed. And as soon as he becomes aware he is, it stops completely, right? But for a long time, I couldn't get close enough to hear what he was saying without him being aware that I was there. And then at a certain point, I realized that if I was in the hallway outside of his bedroom and he was doing it in his bedroom, and I just happened upon this by accident, I could hear what he was saying, right? And all the things that he's saying is not part of what like a normal person would have as part of their inner dialogue generally, right? It was either of a explicit nature or of a military nature, right? The things now, he used to be in the Navy. He fixed military airplanes down like somewhere between Los Angeles and San Diego, right? And he had some exposure to something happen that affected his hearing. So he has poor hearing in one ear, and then also on that side, his hand shakes. So something got damaged that affected him in that way. I forget what the name of that effect is, right? So I don't know if that event is related to all of this whispering and stuff like that that's going on, right? But it's not ever talking about like what's going on in the room or what conversation he just had or is about to have. It's not correlated to anything that makes any sense for the environment. It's all of an explicit, disturbing, or military nature, right? Which is not stuff that he generally talks about normally. So I don't know if he's like getting beams from the military still. I don't know if I have no, if it's like similar to the stuff that Charlie talks about. I don't know what it is, but it's constant, it's incessant. And I was somewhat, though not completely, shocked at what at first, for years, I just thought he was talking to himself the way I do, but he just does it in a whisper and he's self-conscious about it and monitors. I don't care if people hear me talking to myself. Like I tell people I talk to myself, right? But when you hear and understand the content, it's either some sort of like disorder that he has learned to manage or control the way someone who has like mild Tourette's, like Adam Curry. I don't know if you know who Adam Curry is, but he has Tourette syndrome, but he's learned to manage and control it, right? But he will say that sometimes after he's been controlling it for a while, he like wants to go into a room by himself and freak out and just say and do all the weird things, right? So I don't know if it's something like that or if there's something more disturbing going on, right? But it's crazy. I say that, I try to say that without judgment, but some of the things I've heard him say, right, are disturbing.
Yeah, yeah. It's the inner voice kind of being silenced, the stuff that you can't say out loud. Like, yeah, like it might just be like a bit of like passive aggressive like behavior from you or your partner, and you go in the other room, you go, fucking, can I swear on this? That effing bitch, you fucking effing told me to fucking effing the fucking, I'll kick her in the fucking, and it might be like that. Yeah, it might be like the Adam Curry thing. Yeah.
This wasn't that. This was of a more graphic, explicit nature that didn't seem to be related to anything that was like happening in reality. This almost felt to me like he was picking up on some channel or station that's outside of the regular frequency that people hear, but somehow he can hear, and he's either repeating what he's hearing or he's communicating with it in the same way that the girl in Charlie's living room was communicating with some voice that was outside of the normal band of hearing.
It's just incredible stuff, isn't it? Like, have you heard of the concept of a daemon?
Yes.
Like, you've got like a control, like this is our avatar, but we've actually got the player. If this was a computer game analogy, we've got the actual player playing us somewhere, our daemon, and maybe that's them talking through their headset, their PlayStation headset.
Yeah.
Not very, they might be pissed off that their character, their avatar, is not doing the thing they want it to do, or something.
Yeah, I watched this new video that came out yesterday. Are you familiar with I guess it's one person, but there's this temptation to say group, but I think it's just one person named M83.
Nope, never heard of it.
This person makes very interesting sounding music, and their videos and the visuals that go along with it are fantastic. And it was actually one of their videos was the subject of the closing episode of my time with Randy Moggins. We analyzed this particular video called, I think it's called Wait, We're Dreaming, or Wait. So that's funny. Randy Moggins just literally texted me right now as I said that. The moment I said his name, a text came through.
This is what I'm talking about, Emily. Yeah. This is it. Anyway, sorry, let's not go nuts on that.
Okay. So
incredible synchronicity right there.
We did a really good deep dive on this particular video that we had just, I think it was called Hurry Up, I'm Dreaming, or Wait, I'm Dreaming, or something. Right. But yesterday, M83 posted a new video that was exactly what you're talking about. It was like this creepy looking monster with 3 eyes, or 5 eyes. 5 eyes. How about that? 5 eyes. Okay. One in the middle of the forehead, his 2 regular eyes, and then 2 smaller eyes on his cheekbones, right? Sitting at a control panel that looked more like a DJ or a DJ's control panel than a video game thing. But he was observing 3 characters on the screen in front of him. And then he had this like synthetic wired brain thing that he was touching. And he was like monitoring what they were doing in real life and like on a cartoon screen kind of thing. Right. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like what you're talking about. It's like one being a daemon, or it was somewhere between like a daemon and like what my friend Juan would call a homunculus, right? Kind of thing. Mm-hmm. This sort of like consciousness creature type of thing. But sitting there like monitoring and measuring and calibrating and trying to control, but also being surprised at some of the actions that seem to indicate that the characters had some degree of autonomy outside of his influence or whatever it is, right? So it's exactly what you're talking about here. The name of it is called Ocean's Niagara, right? Yeah, it's basically what you're saying.
Yeah. Or big, like you call it, big Emily. Big Emily is up there controlling, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, I think, and this goes into like all of this stuff, your point as we started about, we don't need to have Ready Player One, right? Like, and that because whatever, just falsely creating cues or blocking entrance or exit to things does enough to create the chaos. So, and this was the other thing I wanted to talk about, but maybe we'll pin it and we can talk about this next time. If you're familiar with Operation Chaos or Project Mayhem, right? That could do just the same thing. But it's also, to my point, for like a lot of people who are really concerned about, virtual reality and all of this smart stuff coming in. Like, I understand, I'm not saying you're silly to be concerned about it, but I don't know why they think we don't already live in something that's kind of like that. Like, I've told many times the story of when I was on mushrooms, the tree was laughing at people because they're so scared of 5G towers when trees basically do the exact same thing. They're just a superior technology because they're pretty.
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And they have other things that they do as well. And so, like, we don't know when the advent of technology was. And the things that we think of as organic could just be earlier iterations that have developed more character. Like, you know how people talk about old houses have more character than the modern new thing? Well, in fucking 30 years, people will say that about the houses that are modern now, right? So when you look at trees, they didn't always look the way that they look now. They used to just look like a stick on a post, or, you know, a stick coming up, or some little bush or whatever, right? The way things develop, they almost become like some sort of hybridization anyway. Like, even if it's a technology, if there's enough like old growth or what we call natural organic stuff going on around them. I mean, I've seen electric towers that have enough vines wrapped around them that you think it's a tree, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you get up and look at it, right? So we don't know when this whole process started. And we don't know that we're just not living in the previous generation's chararium or augmented reality or controlled environment. I'm sure we are, right? So like I understand the drive to want to stop it, but it should at least be balanced by the drive to understand clearly that which we are already in,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And we also have to, you know, we can't rule out that today is the first day that the simulation switched on, and everything in our head is an implanted backstory.
Yeah.
We can't rule that out.
Yeah. I don't think we can rule anything out, right? I don't think we can rule anything out at this point, but we also should remind ourselves that just something as simple as blocking entrance or exit to something can entirely change the nature of an experience or the outcome of something. And that there doesn't have to be an exotic explanation for it, though there could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Do you have anything going on that people should go look for, or just here with me every month or so?
I've got nothing going on. Nothing.
Right.
I'm kind of barely hanging on into the online world, to be honest with you. But yeah, nothing going on. My Patreon's shut down. I mean, it's still there, but there's nothing really. This is going to be on there, but I'm not. I've told people on Patreon I'm no longer going to be like putting pressure on myself to make content and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, no, nothing here. Nothing.
All
here.
right. Well, then,
Twitter.
if
Check
you
out my Twitter.
listening to this banter, you can find it here approximately once a month. And so we'll be doing that again next time. This was interesting. I didn't have any idea where we were going to go today, other than the few things you'd sent me, and we didn't even get to the cars, the catalytic converter thefts ruining people's lives, which is interesting too. Maybe we can hit on that next time if there hasn't been some other activity that dominates our thoughts. But thanks for
also
hanging.
one last thing.
Yeah,
we're not going to talk about it now, but next time, J.J. Abrahams. J is the 10th letter of the alphabet. So that's 1010. That's XX. That's XX Abrahams right there. And we'll pick on that next time.
All right. Very good. Let's just keep we should keep a note board of the things that we still have pins in. All right, guys. We'll see you next time. Take care. Have a good one.